And welcome back. Well, you're seeing a selection of tools here, and we're going to try to get a video out here for you today. And I do apologize for the lack of content recently. The primary job has been extremely busy these last couple of weeks, and we've been hit with quite a bit of rain lately, which has kind of put on hold some of our plans to get out here and make some video content for you. But as you can see, we're back on our Project X, our candy apple red Ram here. Red Ram. This is a 2012 Ram 1500. This is what's known as a quad cab because we have a full-size door and a partial door and a standard size cab. Remember, they are available in a what would be considered a crew cab, which would be a full-size front door, a full-size rear door, and a standard cab, as well as some 1500s also have what's called a mega cab, which is two full-size doors and about a 6-inch longer extended cab space. And that's going to become important here in a second. What we're going to do today, or attempt to do today, is install a set of factory side steps onto this Ram to make it a bit easier for individuals in order to get in and out of this particular truck. And if you remember, when we got this truck in initially from the auction house, it came on a set of 17s, but if you look at the door sticker on this Ram, remember it came from the factory with 20s. So if you remember from previous videos, we put it back up on a set of 20s, and so it gets it a little bit higher off the ground, but you know, in some cases could make it a bit more difficult to get in and out of the vehicle, and that's what we're going to try to solve today. So what you can see here is a set of instructions off a factory set of side steps. And I'll get you the part number for this in a moment, but this is going to be for a quad cab installation. There is differences in here between the types of cabs that you have, mainly due because it will change the length of the side of the running board that you need to accommodate the cab itself. So you see a pile of parts here and a pile of tools, a little bit of touch-up paint, some drill bits, because unfortunately the way this kit operates and the way a lot of the factory OEM kits operate is that we're going to have to, and not that I really like this part of it, but we're going to have to drill some holes through the pinch weld here on the bottom, because these brackets for these rails not only have a set of bolts that bolt in to the other side of the railing through some riv nuts, but it also has two additional bolts that come in a little higher up and pass through where the pinch rail runs. So we'll cover all that. That's why you see that we have our touch-up paint here. We got some spray cans as well as the touch-up sticks that, if you remember, we used earlier on this Ram when we were taking care of some rust spots. Now these aren't the OEM touch-up paint sticks because they're almost impossible to get these days just due to supply issues. This is from a website called Touch Up Direct that you've seen in some previous videos. This is actually working out quite well, fairly well. So once we drill the holes in through the pinch welds, we're going to put some primer and some color coat and then follow it up with some clear and let that dry. Again, we're doing that to help protect this pinch weld because we're going to drill through it, so that way, you know, we're going to end up with exposed metal, and we just want to keep that exposed metal from rusting on us. But back to the kit. Inside this kit is just a set of install instructions that you see here, as well as, the nice thing is, with this being a factory kit, they give you all the hardware you need to mount it, or at least in this particular type of side step they do. So they give you all the bolts you need, and if you don't have them, which a lot of times if you're putting rails on, sometimes you won't, is that they also give you the riv nuts that you may need, and in this case we do need, because we don't have these riv nuts already installed in the frame rail. Now the interesting thing about the factory riv nuts versus a standard riv nut, and hopefully you can see that there, you can see it's kind of got that same bolt type pattern, hexagon type shape, in the sense that what's going to happen is this is going to meet up and fit into that same shape that's in the frame rail. Now standard round riv nuts look like they will work, but this has the shoulders in it that's going to help keep this from spinning while you're trying to expand this out. And the nice thing is, like I said, the kit does come with the riv nut inserts that you need, as well as all the bolts. Now they also included a riv nut installation tool, and you can see that is from actually from a place in Ontario, Canada. So hello to all my Canadian viewers. Actually, these running boards, and I'll show it to you here in a moment, are actually made out of Canada. And they give you the installation tool. And the way this works is, and I'll cover this more when we get to it, this bolt is going to thread into the center of that. You're going to hold this center piece here in place, because you'll see it rotates freely on this bolt. This you're going to hold into place, and you're going to tighten down the head of this bolt, which is going to take that riv nut on the inside of it. It's going to grab that nut and it's going to collapse it forward, causing this to get pinched. So basically the head of this riv nut, this shoulder right here, is going to be against the frame rail, and then it's going to take this bolt, this nut that's inside the end of this riv nut, it's going to pull it forward and it's going to pinch this in place. And I'll show you that more when we get to it. Now, the cool thing is they give you the installation tool. And some of these installation tools, depending on the size of the riv nut, you can see that you just hold the top bolt in with, it's either an Allen or an actual bolt. In our case, it's a bolt, so we'll hold this part with a wrench. We'll spin this part with a socket or with another ratcheting wrench, whichever you prefer, until we get these snug down. Now what we're also going to try is, I picked this up as well. This is kind of a right-angled riv nut installation tool. Now this particular tool, when I ordered it from Amazon, didn't come with the right bit to fit these riv nuts, but I was able to find the right bit using the kit from our other riv nut installation tool, and so you've seen in some of our previous videos. The bigger riv nut installation tool, kind of with the big two hands on it, that kit was a little bit more diverse in the sense that it had one. And what this is a number 8 or an M8 riv nut installation tool, or insert in the end of this tool. So like I said, we're going to give both a try. We're going to see if, you know, this has got enough of a lever action or can apply enough torque to pull these down. If this doesn't work out too well, again, this is included with the kit, which tells me it should work out fine. And depending on the space requirements that we have in there, if this won't get in between the frame rail that we need, if we run out of space, then we may have to resort to using this one. But the cool thing is, again, it comes with the kit, which is nice. And of course, a set of instructions here. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring you over and show you the rails themselves and the ones we've chosen to go with. We went with the flat black ones as opposed to the tubular ones. Now the flat black ones are a little bit more expensive versus the tubular ones, but you can see here they actually look quite nice. I've had these on some other Ram 1500s before, and just to show you the part number we're dealing with here, and you can see that yes, it is made in Canada. So once again, hello to our Canadian viewers. And you can see the part number there is 82211700 AE-001. And again, these were ordered for a quad cab 1500 4th gen Ram, and they are marked on the underside. Hopefully you can see that there. This one happens to say this is the right hand rail and the left hand rail. Now a couple things we need to do here, and what we're going to do is take off these brackets. And the reason why I'm going to do that is I want to use one of these brackets, or probably just take all 3 of them off to be on the safe side. Is that this is the hole that we have to drill into the pinch weld, is the 2 bolts here that go on top. These bolts will be behind everything. It'll have bolts that'll come through, it'll bolt into the riv nuts, and these 2 that are ones that go through the pinch weld that we have to get into place. So what I want to do is, rather than try to measure that kind of like the instructions show, I'd rather put the riv nuts in get these kind of hand tight where they're going to be, and use these actual brackets as a way to mark with a punch where we need to drill through the pinch weld, just to make sure we get those holes where they need to be. And I'll show you all this, so it'll make a bit more sense when you see it in a visual. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one. We went to this one over here. This one's for the left hand side of the vehicle. I'm going to bring it over there first to make sure that the length looks okay, and then I'm going to take the brackets off and I'll bring it back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our left hand side rail here, and lengthwise it looks good. So we definitely got the right kit. And yes, and don't worry, I did verify that we had the right kit prior to taking everything out of the box. But you can see kind of what they're having us do here for the next step is that you'll notice that down here at the bottom, where we're just kind of making sure that we got everything going towards the front of the vehicle and we've got the right piece, that it says that if this is a model year 2008 to 2012, proceed to step 3. If it's 2013 or newer, proceed to 9. So since we're dealing with a 2012, we're going to proceed to step 3. Now they make a note in here that what you're seeing is the pictures for like a crew cab type install, but it's basically going to be the same process, even though that we have a quad cab instead of a crew. So what they're having us do here is kind of mark the location of these brackets underneath these rails prior to removing the brackets off the rails. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that next. We're just going to get a silver Sharpie underneath all 3 of the brackets you see here on this side, get them marked, and then go ahead and remove them. And let me just flip this around. I want to be careful not to drag it because we don't want to scratch this up. So what they're having us do here is, because you do have a little bit of slop and kind of the side to side and back and forth adjustments on this, is that what they want you to do, as you can see in the diagram there, is that we're just going to take like a Sharpie or some kind of marking instrument and mark it right here on the sides of each one of these brackets. Take those 2 bolts out and then take these off. And then once we get our riv nuts installed, get this loosely installed, then we can use, again, the front of this bracket to line it up with where it's going to be on the pinch weld, and that'll tell us where we need to mark and then drill our 2 top holes to go through. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to get a Sharpie. I'm going to work on getting these 3 brackets off, and then we'll go on to the next step. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our brackets off. Now I went ahead and also, as the instructions stated, marked the sides of each bracket. And the reason why they're having you do that, because remember, there is some play here. But most importantly, you can see that the bolts that secure the brackets on can actually slide quite a bit, because there's just there's grooves all the way running down. So this running board can actually be adjusted quite a bit forward and back once you have it on the vehicle. So again, the reason why they're having you mark that is just so you can kind of get the brackets back in the, at least the appropriate spots they were in from the factory. And of course, you know, we'll leave these loose when we go to do the final install, make sure that we've got a good even distance from left to rear in our cab before we tighten those back down. We went ahead and also, again, I don't think there's any difference in these brackets. They all look identical. But I went ahead and just also marked each bracket as far as which one was the front, the middle, and the rear. So that's done. And next thing that they have us do is to install our riv nuts next, now that we have our brackets off. And again, like I said, what came inside the kit is this, what they call a riv nut installation tool here. And as you can see, it's just a nut that spins on the bolt freely. It's got like a little beveled edge that you can see there that fits on the riv nut itself. I'll show you this here. Let's get this in a better spot so I can keep this in the shot. There we go. So this would be inside the frame rail, rested up against the edge here. And you can thread this on ahead of time. And you can see that beveled edge seats in there quite nicely. So then what's going to happen is you're going to insert this into the frame rail. You're going to keep this flush while you do this. And then one wrench is going to hold our center nut, the one that spins freely like that. And then you're going to come in probably with a socket or a ratcheting wrench to make this easier, and you're going to grab a hold of that top one, and you're going to keep the center one from spinning. Meanwhile, you're going to tighten down the top, and then again, and also kind of keeping a little bit of pressure forward on this to keep this flush with the frame rail. And then what this is going to do, once again, is cause the nut that's in here to move forward inside this insert, basically then creating a pinch between this shoulder, the frame rail, and the back of this nut as it moves forward. Now, it doesn't really say in the instructions here how many times you should turn this, but I'm going to, just from dealing with a little bit of these in the past, I would say that you can kind of see they give you notes here to let you know that that's fully seated as you're tightening it up. This is kind of an ideal of what it looks like when the insert is installed. But what you're going to feel is you should feel the resistance turning this bolt up. It should tighten up. But now you don't want to go too tight with it, you know, and run the risk of stripping the nut that's in here or perhaps breaking this adapter. So I guess once it starts to feel tight and snug, you want to back off at that point and check it. And ultimately what you're looking for is that this rib nut should be seated flush against the frame rail and be nice and sturdy and held into position. So I'll get underneath and get you set up here on a shop light so we can kind of see this. Now remember, we also commented that we have this installation tool here, and I went out and got this right-angled rib nut installation tool to have the extra space, because the other tool that we have, like I commented on, the bigger one with the big, you know, double arms on it that you see all over Amazon, it's too long to get in the space we're dealing with here, so I picked this one up. Now unfortunately, just to reiterate, that the kit that this one came with, as far as these inserts, didn't cover an M8, and this is an M8 insert. But so thankfully this bit, it looked like they used pretty universal threading. This bit out of the other rib nut install tool threaded into this tool just fine. And as you can see, we can also take their rib nut, thread it onto the tool, and we can kind of do the same thing here. Now it's a little bit nicer in the sense that you don't have to hold this piece, you just have to maintain pressure up against the cab. Again, this is shouldered, so it's going to keep this from rotating on us, and as long as I just keep some pressure to keep this flush with the frame rail, and then, or I should say the body, not the frame rail. I keep saying frame rail, but you'll see when I get underneath, when we get underneath there. There we go. But we're going to hold this flush, and then we're going to squeeze the handle. Now, one thing I want to see on this tool, some of the complaints on this tool was that these handles were too hard to squeeze because they're relatively close together. So it took a lot of, I guess, hand strength to get the torque on this, and other people were saying that it was just fine. So we're going to give this a shot. We're going to see how well this works. If it doesn't work out too well, then we'll use the little tool that they included inside the kit, and we'll give that a shot. But let me get you set up and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got you zoomed in on a set of what we're dealing with here. And again, on this particular year and model, we don't have these rib nuts pre-installed. Now they do say on some of these trucks the rib nuts are there and you don't have to go through this step, but in this case we do. So again, you'll see that's kind of a bolt pattern hexagonal type shape, and it matches what's in the frame rail. So what's going to happen with either tool you use is that we're just going to rotate that till it fits up. You can see it goes inside there, and this is where we would normally use the install tool, either their install tool, to then thread in. And like I said, if you wanted to, if it makes it a bit easier, we can thread this onto the tool ahead of time, insert our tool in, and then again we're going to hold down this one we're going to tighten up the top one here until this expands enough that it holds it securely, and you can kind of see how it's wanting to fall out of there. So once that nut on the inside moves forward and expands that insert out, that should hold itself up enough in place that we can then unthread our insert and take it out. Now we've also got our installation tool, and I kept calling this a frame rail earlier. I apologize. You can see it's just part of the side of the body. So I'm going to take our riv nut installation tool, or handheld. I should say they're both handhelds, but you can see that we just got our insert threaded in. Again, we're going to turn that until it lines up and we're flush. Now, what I should be able to do, sorry, I didn't mean to hit you there. What we should be able to do is keep this held up flat up against the body here and just kind of squeeze the handle until it feels nice and tight and we're starting to hit a pretty good resistance. Hopefully I can keep my hand out of the shot here and allow you to see this. So I'm just going to keep this forward. Yeah, I can see what they mean about this little handheld tool needing some particular amount of force. There it goes. It just takes a little bit to get over that initial. Now, since I've created a little bit of space in there because I've squeezed it one time, I'm going to take the adjustment here on the back and turn it so it tightens this back up and threads in. Otherwise, what happens is, as it pulls it forward, you end up with slack and this doesn't seat up against here firmly. Okay, so that was 2 pumps on the handle. I'm going to stop right there because that actually feels pretty tight. One pump on the handle may have been enough, to be honest with you. Okay, so we've got that in there. Oh yeah, that's nice and secure at this point. Hopefully my hands didn't block it too much on you. Let me grab one of the bolts for this. I just want to see how this feels. Okay, yeah. That goes in, that's nice and tight, that's nice and straight. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Again, each tool is going to be a little bit different, and using the tool that came with it will definitely get the job done, but it's just going to be kind of like using the handheld tool. The handheld tool makes it a bit easier because you can kind of just, like you saw me do, just grab and squeeze it until that insert expands out. And then what would happen with this one, again, you're just going to hold that, you're going to tighten up this top bolt until it expands this out. You just want to watch kind of how far you're tightening it because you don't want to overdo these inserts, but pull. So what we need to do is we need to do this same process on the remainder of these inserts. And like I said, the kit does come with enough hardware and enough inserts to pull this off. Now, they don't give you any extra inserts, so if you mess one of these up, you may have to go get yourself a spare insert. Now, they do sell the side step mounting kit as the hardware separately as its own part number, and I'll put a part number in the description in case you're needing just the mounting hardware. Like maybe you get the rails like off of a used Ram and you need the mounting hardware to put it on yours. You can buy the kits, the hardware separately. So perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and show you another one of these. And I'm going to use the little handheld tool that we have, since this rev nut tool seems to be doing the job. Makes this a little bit easier. Thread that back on. The only thing about this particular tool is that this adjustment back here is fairly tight. You can see what it does here. What I was doing is that when I tightened that up the first time, it created a little bit of a gap because it brought the nut on the inside of this insert closer to you. So what I was doing before I went and cram the handle down again was just eliminating the gap. So if this is inside the body like you see it, if I turn this back adjustment here, you can see it takes this adapter and you can see it threads it back in and snugs it back up. So I was tightening this back up before I went in for a second pull in the handle. The only problem is this is tight. It's a little bit tight to spin this. It's getting a little bit looser now that it's being used, because this is again a relatively new tool. I may spray some oil in there just to help that out. Okay, and you can see the kind of space that you're dealing with between the body and the frame rail here isn't very much, which is why the full-size install tool is kind of a pain in the rear. You just don't have the throw that you need to get in here. Okay, so I've gotten one squeeze on it. I'm going to re-tighten this up so this sits flush with this insert again. Okay, yep, and I just felt it bite onto the inside of this on that second squeeze of that handle. So since we have that now in there, and interesting enough, when it did tighten up, you kind of felt that insert kind of move and get flush and kind of line up to where it needed to be. But again, when you're doing this, what I found is you want to make sure that this is, you know, that you push it in a little bit to make sure that this stays in the right spot before you begin to tighten that insert up. There we go. Okay, so we got our second insert in. So yeah, this tool is actually working pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, it takes a little bit of grip strength to get over the initial amount of torque that you need to pull that in, but once that insert starts to collapse, it actually seems to work fairly well. So you can see we got our two inserts in, we got a bunch more inserts to do. So rather than bore you with a bunch of repetitive activity there, I'm just going to continue to go through here and get all our inserts installed, and I'll bring you back for the next piece. And again, you're not missing anything but not seeing this in action, but just to reiterate, it's just a little bit of a different of a process. Rather than pulling this bolt tight, what you're doing is that you would do the same thing here. And let me show you this. Let me get, pardon the camera work, hopefully you don't get dizzy. Get you on another set of these insert holes here. There we go. So that's our insert threaded on. And what you would do is put the insert in the hole. Now you're going to want to hold forward on that a little bit until you get that to tighten. But again, you're going to hold down the center. You're going to tighten the top. As it draws that in, you're going to feel that get tight. And you're going to get to the point you're going to feel that's going to snug up really good. You may even feel like we do with the handheld tool, with the other tool, you're going to kind of feel that insert bite and pinch into place. And then what you can do is you can then just rotate your bolt and take your entire assembly off, and then your insert will be in place. But it's kind of, again, kind of cool. They do give you that in case you don't have a Riv nut install tool to put them in with. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and continue to work on getting these installed, and I'll bring you back one moment. One other thing I wanted to show you on these inserts is kind of the gauge to help you tell when you've got it to where it needs to be as far as its tightness. You can see down in there you've got some distance between the top of the uninstalled Riv nut and where the nut is at the bottom. And if you come back and you look at one you've installed, you can see that that distance is considerably less. You can see that that nut has been brought more to the forward position, again, which is what you're doing with either tool, is that you're bringing that nut forward and you're causing that metal inside to bunch up and collapse and pinch between the head of the insert and this side piece as well. So again, you can kind of remove your tool and look down in here and kind of gauge where your nut is at in relation to if you've gotten that tight enough. Because again, even though you've got a little bit of gap in there now, again, still of where the top of the rib nut is versus the nut, remember, you've got the thickness of the material you're going through as well. So you can see that, this one's nice and close to the top. It's nice and tight in. It doesn't move, it doesn't rattle, so we're good to go. So I figured I just wanted to show that to you as kind of a difference, and hopefully that'll help you gauge on your install. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our brackets just loosely hung in place. So we do have all our rib nuts installed. And I went ahead and just took these temporary pieces of trim off, and these just sit on top of these brackets. I'll show you that here, how to get these back on when we do the reinstall. They literally just slide over the top. And they're just there to kind of cover up this area here, as well as the 2 bolts that go on the top. So these are what we have to mark and drill for. So we've got our 2 bolts in the back, which again, we're just loosely in here to hold the bracket in place. And then you've got the 2 bolts that they want up here that have to come through the pinch weld, which in this case, we do not have a factory hole to get those installed. So what they want you to do in the instructions is, as we've done here, is just loosely get the brackets in. And this is the reason why I marked these brackets. I don't think it matters. But remember, before we took these off, we did mark as to what was the front, the middle, and the rear of the 3 brackets, just to make sure in case there was any difference in it, but I don't see a difference. So we've got our brackets again loosely held into our rib nuts. Now what we have to do, and let's see if I can get you in here to see this, is that basically I'm just going to take a punch and come up through the center of each one of these where this I don't want to say it's a nut, but it's kind of like one of those speed nuts. You can see where it's clipped into this bracket, and I'm just going to hit it with a punch, and that'll mark our drill location. And I'm going to do that to all 3, that way we get them in the right spot. Now they say to use a, let's see here, so we've got our rib nuts installed, we're past that step, so now we're on the marking step here. So it says to use the 2 M8 fasteners, loosely assemble the bracket removed in step 3, and mark and drill the locations in the pinch weld. So all measurements will be taken from the rearmost edge of the rear slot on the upper part of the bracket to the center or the corresponding rib nut. And they try to give you kind of an explanation as to what they're talking with there, and you can see from what I can gather, and it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but they're giving you a measurement between the center of the rib nut and the back of the bracket, and I'll show you what they're referring to there. These brackets in the back of them, the holes are elongated, so this bracket, even though it's on here, can actually slide forward and back. So what it looks like they're wanting you to do is to make sure that this bracket, the center of this rib nut hole and the outer edge of this rear of this bracket are within a certain distance, and that will position this bracket, left and right of where it needs to be before you mark these holes here. Because again, obviously, if you can slide the bracket forward, that offsets your holes, or you slide it back, it also offsets your holes. Now, with that being said, and looks like the front bracket on a quad cab is 18 millimeters. The center bracket on a quad cab is 24, and the rear is 12. And it looks like, again, just judging by here, looks like that's what they want you to measure. It's kind of a weird measurement to take. I kind of understand what they're referring to, is that from what I can gather, again, this is what I love about Chrysler's instructions. It's not a dig on them, but it's more of kind of like a lot of pictures, and kind of leads itself a little bit open to interpretation. But it looks like they're trying to get you to center this, frontward and back of where it needs to be before you mark these. Now, with that being said, remember, these brackets, when they go onto these rails, remember, they can also, this entire rail can move forward and back of its location because these slots in here. Now, I say that because that's what these will do. Maybe the tubular ones don't do that, where you don't have as much forgiveness, where you can adjust the entire rail forward and back. So what I'm thinking is, and don't quote me on this, is that even if you don't have this, at least on this kit, precisely aligned with, you know, forward and back before you drill where these holes need to be, even if this bracket is a little bit far forward and a little bit far back of where they said to put it, you're going to eat the difference up in the fact that, again, these slots go the entire length of this running board. So it really, you know, shouldn't matter on this particular kit if this bracket is slightly forward or slightly back of where it needed to be. And again, the guides that we made when we took this bracket off, again, were just kind of guides. So when we get everything reassembled, you know, we'll measure probably from the front mud flap that we installed here to the front of the rail, get that measurement to be the same on both sides, and then tighten it down. And you know, where these are in relation to the step bump, if this one happens to be a little bit farther forward than the front one being a little bit farther forward, you're never really going to see it, I guess, is where I'm getting at. Where if this one, again, is farther forward or farther back than the one on the passenger side is in relation, I don't think it's going to be that huge of a difference. So what I'm going to do is get these centered as much as I can, and then come underneath here, and you can see where this can kind of still flex up just a little bit. I'm going to come up a little bit on this, so that way when these holes are drilled through, it goes through as much of the center of this pinch weld as I can. So I may hold up on this just a little bit to kind of get these a bit more centered, and then mark them. And I'm going to go through, do all 6 of them, and then we'll get them drilled. And in case you're curious, it looks like they want you to use an 8mm drill bit. I'll convert that and tell you the one I'm going to go with when we get it done. And yes, there are 2 different size bolts. These are the bolts for the ones you're drilling in, which are a bit smaller. I want to say they still use the same socket. Yeah, they gave it the same head, which is nice. So it's 10mm socket for the head of the bolt, but the bolt itself, I believe these are 8s, and I want to say that these are 10s. Yeah, I believe these are 10s. Yeah. Either way, skinnier bolt because it's not holding up as much weight, but these are the ones that are going to go through the pinch weld. So when I drill these, I'm going to drill them to be a little bit bigger than the bolt itself, just so it's got some slop, so that way we can get all 4 bolts loose in before we tighten it up. And that will give it, again, it'll just give us a little bit of play, because again, on those back bolts, and those holes are elongated, so you got a little bit of play in this bracket to go up, down, left, right, and that's why I want a little bit of play in these bolts as well, just to help get everything aligned. Now, obviously you can't go too big on these because you don't want to be obviously bigger than the size of the pinch weld, but you can see you got a pretty good amount of real estate on this pinch weld down here. So again, enough talking about this. Let me go ahead and get these marked and drilled, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I'm going to alter their instructions a little bit, because having these mounted in place and then trying to get something through this insert to mark the frame rails, kind of a pain with these installed. So these, again, like I said in a previous clip, these just slip in place. What we can do, I'll show you what I'm doing here, is on these, again, I believe they're called speed nuts. If we come down in here and just pick up a little bit on that center tab that locks it in place, just using a small screwdriver, we can slide these out. Do the same thing on this one. Again, slide them out. Now, I'm going to reinstall this and then bring you back and show you it's a lot easier to then get something in here to mark where these 2 holes at are on that pinch weld. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our center bracket just kind of loosely put back in, again held by our riv nuts in the back. And it's what I'm doing as far as left and right of this, I'm just centering this as best I can on the back, because again those holes are elongated. And then once that's done, I'm just coming in here and I'm looking at this center piece here where these holes go through, and you can kind of see that the top part of this little tang, this little tongue, whatever you want to call it, is kind of flush and at the bottom of this pinch weld. Now this pinch weld was a little bit bent because remember in the previous video, this is where we did a little bit of touch-up paint because it looks like they hit something and kind of dinged it here. But I'm just twisting and positioning this bracket as best I can to get this kind of nice and straight and even, this little tang across the top. And you can see with those inserts out, I can now see that I may have to, I have to twist this a little bit. May have to twist it a little bit. There it goes. Yeah, I have to twist this a little bit. And all I'm doing is, again, once I get this lined up and straight, and I get these holes as center as I can into the pinch weld, then I'm just coming in with a silver Sharpie and marking through it, and it's a lot easier to do with those little speed nuts removed. And again, they're pretty easy to take out and pretty straightforward to put back in. So I'm going to do this on the rear, and then once I get all these holes drilled, I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I just wanted to show you here on this rear one, as far as its positioning, left to right, front to back, however you want to call it. I did take this one and slide this one as far forward on its elongated mount holes in the back as I could, just so that way this back of this bracket didn't hit up against the very corner of this cab. As far as the other two, I just centered them up as best I could, but on this one, again, just to let you know, at least on this kit, I did slide this forward as much as I could, again, just for the clearance. But you can see here that with a silver Sharpie, we've got our holes marked. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah. Yep, okay, it's just in the shot there. And then what I'm going to do now is just take a spring-loaded punch to all 6 of these. Get a nice little dot in the center and get these drilled out. But I'll bring you back in one moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our holes drilled, and I've just been brushing in some primer. I do see a spot in there. I need to get a little bit more primer in it. And again, what I'm using is just the little touch-up direct kit that's in there. And again, because we had to drill through here and we have, you know, fresh exposed metal through that pinch weld. And this pinch weld is actually pretty thick. Just FYI, is that I'm gonna thoroughly douse these, continue to douse these with a little bit more primer, get a nice thick coating in there. And yes, I will come back behind it, even though no one will see it, and I'll come back behind it and put some color coat, which is the red top coat, in there as well, just to give it some couple extra layers. Again, it is exposed metal, and I just don't want that to start to rust out our pinch welds over time. But you can see that we got our bracket lined up, we got it marked, we got it center punched, and then we got it drilled out. Now the instructions say to use an 8mm bit, and because I live in the land of imperial measurements, actually we use both. We do use imperial and metric, but the drill bits that you buy over here are imperial, meaning they're measured in inches and not millimeters. But according to the calculator, that converts down to a 5/16 inch drill bit. So what we ended up doing was, as you can see here, we just center punched it. Started out with a much smaller bit. I believe this was a 9/64 bit, just to kind of drill a little bit of a pilot hole, so to speak, and then finish it up with a bigger bit, just so we're kind of lessening the wear and tear of our bits in the long run. So I'm going to let this dry a little bit more, hit it with a little bit more primer. I've done all 6, at least here on the driver's side, so I'm going to do it with another coat of primer, both on the outside and on the inside, let it dry. Like I said, we'll hit it with a little bit of the color coat, which is here. And then once that dries, then we'll see if we can get the brackets lined up and installed on this side. Now a 5/16 inch bit, just to show you here, that is the bolt that you're drilling the holes for. And as you can see, you do get, you know, a little bit of slop. So you got a little bit of room that you can kind of play with this in order to get everything lined up and good to go. But I'm going to continue to work on this, and like I said, put some more primer on this, let it set, put a color coat on it, let it set, and then I'll bring you back when we start to rehang our brackets and to show you what I was referring to earlier before I let you go. And I'll show you this again. To get these covers off, which are on these brackets, they literally just slide. These protective covers or just slide in place like that. All you gotta do is just lift them up to take them off, and that gain you access into those speed nuts. Again, you saw in the video, I just found it easier to take those speed nuts out to mark where those holes were going to end up. So I'm going to continue to work on this, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we've got all of our pinch welds drilled through. We did have to do a little bit of extra work on the passenger side, and I'll show you that. But if you have seen the previous videos in this series, this pinch weld on the passenger side took a little bit of a hit. So we actually had to bend that back out a little bit so it would meet up with the bracket. But we got it taken care of where we should be able to meet up with the bracket without an issue. And as you can see on that one, it's not perfect, but we did go over it with go through the holes we drilled with a couple coats of brushed on, a couple coats of primer, a couple coats of the color coat, and then finish it off with a little bit of clear. Probably a bit of an overkill because no one's ever really going to see it, because that entire area is going to be hidden behind the tang on this mounting bracket. But again, it's done more as to help be a rust preventative, because again, we did drill through it. We do have exposed metal there, so the point was to get that metal covered up. So with all of our holes being drilled on our driver's side here, we're going to go ahead and reassemble our bracket. And if you remember, we took these off, and what happens is these brackets are these speed nuts, where if you remember, go back on this way, in which this end piece faces out, because all the bolts are going to be driven in from the back. So the two that goes into the riv nuts right here, the main ones, and then the two support ones that go through the pinch weld. So again, just like these came out, that little tab will lock them back into place when you push them back in. There we go. Now this top cover, as I was telling you earlier, you can just take your top cover, slide it over your little mounting tabs in the back, and then boom. And then what we can do next is, I'm going to go ahead and I'll bring you back in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and get some bolts in here and leave them all loose until we get everything in alignment, and then I'll bring you back and show you what it looks like. One moment. And welcome back. So see if I can get, I can't do much about the glare. Sun's in full view at this point. It's getting warm out here, but anyway, as you can see there, we've got our two bolts that go through our pinch weld, which are down here at the bottom. Those are the ones we remember. We had the drill, and we put a little paint on there to protect it, as well as our two that went into our riv nuts at the top. Right now everything is just kind of just a little bit more than hand tight. I haven't come in here with the final torque value on these yet. There is a torque value listed in the instructions. Again, it's just a little bit of hand tight. Left everything loose until all the bolts were lined up and started. And I started by kind of tightening these down on the pinch weld first, and then finishing up by doing the ones here on the top on the riv nuts. Now, one thing I did notice on the riv nuts is if you don't have them necessarily all the way flush when you did the install tool, then kind of as you tighten these up, you may feel them kind of finish squishing and compressing up and kind of doing a final seat. But as you can see, I can put a fair bit of weight on here, and that bracket isn't going to move. So that's one of the reasons why they have the additional support kind of going through the pinch weld, is that it's going to help the bracket not flex down when you're putting your body weight on it and you're stepping on that outer rail. And I just wish that you know, just like it had provisions to put the riv nuts in existing holes here, I just wish when it came from the factory, you know, they would go ahead and you know, put the two holes up here and just not have them populated. You know, that way, you know, it would have gotten, you know, primed and sprayed and painted and, you know, protected from the factory. And that way, if you were to go do this job, it'd already be there kind of waiting on you, so to speak. But either way, not too bad. Again, we did paint them, we did prime them, put some paint on it and put some clear coat on it, so hopefully that helps to address any future rust issues. And one thing I failed to mention, that I am also taking this a little bit step further and putting a little anti-seize on every one of these bolts, even though these bolts look to be anodized potentially to help guard against rust. I have seen these rusted. I have seen individuals with these same ramp sets after a period of years, these bolts rust in place, and I've seen some individuals kind of snap these off trying to get them out. So the pinch weld bolts as well as the rib nut bolts, I'm putting a little anti-seize on them before we put them in. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and work on getting the other two. Sorry for the camera angles, I've got to get myself and you, and also try to get this, hopefully it looks like it's in view. But I'm going to go ahead and work on getting the other two hangers on the driver's side here, and then by that point hopefully our first round of paint on the passenger side is done, and then we can crack on with that one. But I'm going to get these other two brackets on the driver's side and I'll bring you back one moment. And welcome back. So I wanted to show this to you before we put this final bracket on our truck here, so you can see we're on the passenger side now. We've got our rear and our middle brackets attached at this point. We're just waiting for a little bit of paint to dry in this area, because like all the other ones, we primed it. This area I did it in rattle canning it with the touch-up paint. Again, some primer, some top coat, and some clear coat. The reason why I use spray cans in this section, it was a little bit bigger. If you remember, we had to bend the pinch weld back out a little bit because something, where the previous owner was, hit something on this side. And if you've seen the previous videos, and you can see it in this one, this area, you can see it's scraped and it's bent in here, scraped, bent in there. So this lower rocker panel's bent up a little bit on this side. So because we had to bend this back and there were some larger paint chips, that's why we just went with the spray can method on this end, and we're just waiting for some clear coat to dry at this point. So while that's drying, before we put this final bracket on this side, I wanted to show this to you because it's a bit easier to see. Now, because of the fact they're using these speed nuts, which as you can see has got quite a bit of slop in them, they'll move quite a bit around, as well as these are the two main bolts that go into the rib nuts we installed earlier, and again, as you can see, they're elongated. So you've got quite a bit of slop and quite a bit of play in this. So when you're drilling your holes through your pinch welds, having this up there definitely is the way to do it, because it gives you that guide point of where to mark it, as we did earlier. But it doesn't have to be necessarily dead to rights even on that pinch weld, because again, you do have again quite a bit of slop in the back of the bracket to play with, and quite a bit of slop within the way these rib nuts set and kind of give you some play as well. So I just want to show that to you because again, it's a little bit easier to see before we put it on the vehicle. But at this point, we're just waiting for this little section of paint underneath this pinch weld here to dry, and then we'll get our final bracket on and proceed from there. We'll get our final bracket on, get everything down to torque spec at that point, and then finally get our side steps installed. So I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got all three brackets on our passenger side, and we just got to put the running board back on. That's not too bad of a deal. You just got to get two bolts, which are diagonal in this case, usually about one in this corner and one in this corner is how they came off. So they got two each, and you just got to get them all lined up to get them dropped down underneath. Again, as we were looking at earlier, this channel runs the length. So I found out it's best to kind of get this front one started, to get the bolts in, and then to put two nuts on the bottom of it, very, very loose, so that way you still have the play to kind of pick it up to get the center two to line up, and then finally the last two to line up. Like I said, it takes a little bit of a fidgeting game, there we go, to get this all to line up, to get the bolts to fall in, and then when they do, we can just get all the nuts tightened up. But I'm gonna play around with this, get all these to line up, drop it back in, and I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. So just to show you what I'm doing here to get these to line back up, is that you got the bolts that we took off that are going in the bracket. There's two in each bracket. They're kind of diagonal with each other, and it's just a matter of sliding the bolts inside the grooves of the step to get them lined up enough to fall in. Now what I found is that you can loosely put some nuts in the front and it still gives you enough play to show you here. When you get around to the middle, you still got enough in there that you can kind of pick the ramp up to slide the bolts underneath to get them to line up. And the tricky part is that if you go to put nuts in the center section, it doesn't give you enough lift when you get to the rear, so you kind of have to get the center to drop in and then manipulate the back without lifting up too much, otherwise the bolts will slide back out of the center bracket. Now it would have been easier to put these brackets onto these side steps, to be honest with you, and then bolt the brackets in place onto the truck. But even though I have to fidget with this and fight with it just a little bit, to me it just seems easier to leave these side steps off, and that way until you get your main brackets put back on, and then you can put the side steps on. Now if you were just taking these existing steps off to do some maintenance, then yeah, I would say leave everything bolted together and just unbolt the brackets from the truck and put everything back on as you know, as a complete assembly. But I'm going to continue to fight with the 2 bolts here and the 2 bolts in the rear, get those started, get them tightened up, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see, I'll show you the driver's side here because it's in sun, it's easier to see than the passenger. But you can see we got our running board install is now complete. So we've got all 6 of the bolts, all 6 of the nuts, that tighten the running board itself to its all 3 brackets are back in. And just to close the loop on this, just to show you, now these are the 2 bolts that go in the rib nuts, as well as the 2 bolts that went through the pinch weld. And the bolts that go through the pinch weld, according to their instructions, gets 10 foot-pounds of torque, and the bolts that go in the rib nuts are 17 foot-pounds. So not a lot of torque goes into those bolts, so just be careful when you're tightening them up that you don't go too tight and break something. All in all, I'll step back from it for here so you can see it, and then we'll go check out the passenger side here. And it is a hot one today, let me tell you. There's our passenger side. So I like it. I like the look of it. I like these. I like the tubular ones as well, but I like these flat ones a little bit better because you can see you got a much wider perch to be putting your foot on. So if you've got big old massive gunboats for feet like I do, these are a bit nicer in that regard. But all in all, not too bad of an install, other than just having to mark and drill through the pinch weld. Again, we took it a step further and put a little bit of paint on there to protect those pinch welds. Now it does mention this, and I haven't looked up this part number, it does mention putting these on the holes. If we go back and look at where they originally drilled them, there they are. So it looks like they're getting the kind of potentially reaming the hole out here, and then there's that part number. I haven't looked that part number up, but that looks like that may be touch-up paint that they're actually instructing you to use. I'd have to run the part number, I haven't done it. But either way, we did some, again, we put some primer and some top coat and some clear coat through those freshly drilled holes, again just helping to negate the rust. We did take it a step further, and as you saw, and use anti-seize on all the bolts that went in. So hopefully if it's either us or anyone else in the future that has to take these side steps off, then hopefully bolts come out without an issue. But all in all, again, it's not a bad little job to do. It just takes a little time to, again, put the brackets up there, mark your holes for the pinch welds, and do your drilling. That seemed to eat a lot of the time. They did give you in this kit all the hardware needed to mount these side steps, to include the Riv nut installation tool. Now we did cheat a little bit and use an actual Riv nut kind of handheld installation tool. I'll put a link to the description of that below, as well as the I'll put the part number to this side step kit. Again, this was for a 4th gen quad cab be very, very mindful if you're going to order side steps for your truck that you order either whether you have a crew or quad or even an extended cab, because it does affect the length of the boards themselves. But I'll put a link in the description to this part number. Once again, this was for a 4th gen quad. I'll put a link in the description to that Rivet install tool. Do keep in mind that if you get that particular kit, it doesn't come with a very big selection of bits for the Rivet nuts themselves. The M8 bit that we needed to use with that tool, I ended up taking from a larger Rivet nut set, so just kind of keep that in mind. Again, all in all, not too bad of a job. I like it. I think it sets off the truck quite well. It also is going to serve its much intended purpose, which is to help just get in and out of the truck without having to hop up or hop down, so to speak. With that being said, I will wrap this video up. If you have not subscribed, please consider to do so. For those of you who have, thank you very much. We have surpassed the 1,500 user mark, and we're continuing to grow and looking to continue that growth. The bigger we get the channel, the easier it is to bring more of this type of content to you. Again, sorry for the delay in posting anything new. Work's been kicking up, and as work is the primary job right now, that has come first. Bills got to be paid, so on and so forth. But have no fear, parts have been coming in for the engine upgrade steadily for this truck. Once we have in the final bits and pieces, then we'll do a video. We'll recap all the parts we've gotten in thus far, and then we'll start prepping when we're going to pull the engine, and that'll begin the whole performance upgrade series at that point. The next thing we'll be doing to this truck, which should be in the next video, is we're going to be dropping the transmission pan, replacing both filters. That's the internal filter as well as the internal screw-on filter. We'll be upgrading this to use a 4-wheel drive transmission pan, because it's a little bit deeper, allows you to have a little bit more fluid capacity. Plus, what we want to do is change the fluid and the filters and run this truck quite a bit, especially at highway speeds, to make sure that it doesn't develop a transmission issue. If it does, no harm, no foul. I'd rather know about it now, because as we have the engine pulled out, much easier to do a transmission swap with the engine out than it would be to kind of do it after the fact. With that being said, I thank you, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Bye.